The story begins with a Jairu named Akari Watanabe making a wish to a shrine. Meanwhile, a fellow student named Shirori Sakurazaka goes up the stairs to the shrine, but trips and ends up falling on Akari's waist. After that, Shirori asks her if she's there regarding her partner for the marriage practical, but Akari denies so and runs away. We are then explained what the marriage practical is, a part of high school necessary for graduation, where two students are chosen to live together as a mock married couple. Then in a new dorm, they're monitored by a sensor that monitors how they behave with each other, and grades them depending on that. At the end of the month, the top 10 students with the most points, A rank, are given the opportunity to change partners. We're now introduced to our protagonist, Jiro Yakuin, a student with confidence issues, alongside his best friend, Sadaharu Kamo. They get interrupted by Akari, who tells them to make way. As Jiro complains about her personality to Sadaharu, we're introduced to Minami, one of the most popular boys in school, and Akari's love interest. Now in class, Shirori talks to Jiro about the marriage practical. She's Jiro's childhood friend and first love, who still has a huge crush on. Not knowing that she feels the same way towards him, he constantly shrugs off any thoughts of her liking him as nonsense. After the couples are selected, Jiro ends up paired with Akari, which ends up bothering the both of them. She then teases him with Shirori, as he wanted to be paired up with her. Due to their bickering, their score drops to -3. Akari then demands him to get along, so they can reach the A rank and change their pairing. Embarrassed at the implications of getting along, he is comforted by Akari, making the ranking go up to -2. Jiro then leaves to buy a drink, but ends up seeing Shirori with Minami. He overhears that they both have ended up paired together, which makes him run away. Back at his dorm, he's now depressed, but Akari tries to cheer him up. She tells him again to reach A rank so that can be with Shirori, but are interrupted by Sadaharu, who invites Jiro out. As he's leaving, Akari demands a goodbye kiss to reduce the negative points, and due to being pressured by both of them, he misunderstands, and ends up kissing her on the lips instead of on the cheek. This makes the point tally go back up to 0. Later, Jiro wakes up to Shirori telling him that if he doesn't wake up, she'll kiss him, only for her to then headbutt him. He then wakes up again, realizing that it was actually Akari telling him to wake up. 1 week later, Jiro sees Shirori and Minami walk together. He then suddenly sees her grabbing Minami's arm, making Jiro be depressed again. Later that day, Akari tells him that he's going to karaoke with Manami. After that, Jiro meets up with a teacher who warns him that since his score has remained 0 for a week, he's currently at serious risk of not graduating. After this, he's now sitting at the entrance of the school, but Shirori ends up running into him. Out of nowhere, she grabs his arm, and it's revealed she did so because she thought she saw a bug at first. He then realizes she did the same Minami back then because a bug scared her. Since Jiro only calls her by her last name, and doesn't have the courage to do otherwise, she asks him to call her by her first name instead, but he can't bring himself to do so. Minami then shows up to hand her the umbrella she forgot, and Jiro insists she and Minami should head back to their dorm together, leaving her disappointed. Akari meanwhile is seen waiting outside in the rain. Jiro, still at school, is approached by Akari with an umbrella. Later, as they walk down a path, she reprimands him for not leaving with Shirori, and tells him not to give up, as she also wants to be with Minami. Now at home, Akari has made them dinner, and helps him write down love on his food. He then tries to spoon-feed her, and after initially refusing, she accepts. They then end up locking eyes with each other, only for Jiro to be interrupted by a call from Sadaharu, who he then thanks for the save. Shirori knocks on Jiro's door, and asks him if he'll stay with her. He then wakes up, realizing it was just another dream, but he then hears Akari knocking on his door. She asks him to stay with her just for this night. They then watch a horror movie, as she heard that doing it so late at night raises a lot of points, but it doesn't work, and he turns the TV off. She then tells him to wear matching pajamas she bought earlier, and asks him to face the other way as she's going to change her clothes there. He begins to do the same, but then a blackout happens thanks to a thunderstorm, which makes Akari hug him out of fear. Thanks to this though, the point tally goes up to 15. Jiro reaches for his phone, and turns on his flashlight, only to see that Akari is crying, which makes her shove his head as she didn't want him to look at her. As the locks to their room are digital, and activated only with their fingerprints, they are unable to access them while the power is out. She asks him to tell a funny story, but ends up telling a horror one, making her angry. But then, she holds his hand, and asks him if she can depend on him a little. She then turns on a candle, and rests on Jiro's shoulder. He then hugs her, and tells her that she's cute, but quickly regrets it, but thankfully notices that she's fallen asleep already. He then holds her hand, and ends up falling asleep as well. but Akari is shown to have heard everything he said. At the end of the month, they both have finished in the 12th position with 15 points. They then notice that Minami and Shirori have finished semi-first in the year ranking. Jiro, though worried about Shirori, is a little happy that things between her and Minami aren't working out, but also keeps in mind that they also need to reach rank A in order to change partners. Back in his room, he's now sick with a cold, alone at home because Akari left with her friends earlier. He then hears the doorbell ring, and is surprised to find that it's Shirori. At a coffee shop, Akari is having lunch with her friends, Natsumi and Saki. They talk about how these pancakes are supposed to feel like a kiss, but this makes Akari think back to the time when Jiro kissed her, making her blush, and vehemently deny that they feel like one. Back at Jiro's dorm, Shirori reveals that it was Akari, the one who called her over so she could take care of him. Jiro tries to again deny his feelings for her as to not get hurt once more, and has a flashback to back when they were younger. Back then, Shirori had to change schools, and he had decided to confess to her the day she was leaving. But he was interrupted by her, who asked him if he will always stay her friend. Back in the present, Jiro finishes eating Shiori's food. After talking about their mock marriages, and about how she's struggling with hers, she tells him that it might have been better if he were her husband, but then says it was a joke. Jiro then promptly holds her hand, and calls her by her first name, telling her that she can pass this test, but he then quickly apologizes and hides under his sheets. After a bit, he falls asleep. Shirori tells him while he sleeps, that she was so happy because he finally called her by her first name, and approaches him for a kiss. Back at the coffee shop, Akari's friends are teasing her with Jiro and Minami, only to notice that she's just staring blankly into space. Back in Jiro's room, Shirori stops herself before she kisses him. She then has a flashback to time she had to change schools. After Jiro failed to confess to her, she tries to tell him that she'd like to go with him somewhere when she comes back, but Jiro interrupts her, saying that he has to go and leaves ignoring her. Later, Akari comes back home and takes a shower. After that, Jiro thanks her for calling Shirori over, and tells her that he'll try his best to be a good husband, so that she can end up with Minami, but this only leaves her wondering why she feels so annoyed at him saying that. Akari and Jiro are having lunch in their dorm. She asks him what do men like girls to do for them. He tells her that they like home-cooked lunches. They begin making one, and she has Jiro try her food. He tells her he likes sweet rolled omelets better, but she tells him that those won't work as Minami has a mature vibe to him. As they enjoy their food, the point tally goes up to 19. Now at school, Jiro eats his lunchbox next to Sadaharu. He teases him with Akari, but he stops him, saying that he doesn't want to make things awkward with her back home. Then, Akari approaches him, and asks him how the lunch was, but end up getting into an argument over it. Back home in the morning, Akari has prepared a lunch box for Minami. She has Jiro have the last piece of the rolled omelet, which is still not sweet, and that action makes the point tally go up to 23. Before she leaves, she asks Jiro to do the goodbye thing the other day, claiming that it made her feel safe. He gets close to her, but are interrupted by the doorbell, so he go to open the door, and find Shirori outside. She came to leave them some apple pies she made since she ended up making too many for Minami as there were a request from him since he likes sweet things. This makes Akari sad, but he tries to cheer her up. He ends up sort of fumbling it though, as he tells her that any guy would want to have relations with her. She asks him if he's ever thought about that with her, but he denies having done so. She calls him a liar, and gets on top of him, and asks him again repeatedly. She begins taking off her clothes, but Jiro has an uneasy feeling and stops her, saying that this is something one only does with someone they love. She gets off of him, and as she smiles, she says to stop this married couple thing. After that, their married life fell apart, with their point tally dropping down to 2. Now at the end of the month, Minami and Shirori noticed that they have now ended up in the A rank in the 8th position, but they also noticed that Jiro and Akari have ended up 75th this time. Jiro thinks back to when Akari got on top of him, thinking that she was at first playing a joke on him, but then noticed that she was for real. As he noticed she was feeling nervous, he wonders if that was her first time doing something like that. He then encounters Shirori, who asks for some time alone with him. They head to the balcony, and she asked him if something happened between him and Akari, to which he responds that they had a fight, and that he couldn't find the right timing to apologize. She tells him that Akari will understand him, encouraging him. Jiro goes back to his dorm with the point counter displaying 0, and asks to have a word with Akari. She lets him into her room, and he apologizes for what happened. She gets angry, claiming that it was her fault, and tells him to forget about it. Jiro then tells her that the reason he stopped back then was because he felt he had to treat her with more care than that. He then asks her have things be like the way they were before, and asks her for another chance of being her husband. Akari laughs at him, saying that what she meant back then was more of a vibe, since they couldn't stop actually being one because of school. She tells him that she's enjoying the married life more than she thought she would, and teases Jiro, telling him that she likes him quite a lot, but then says it was just a prank. They then end up in good terms again. Now on her balcony, she thinks on how she finally told Jiro that she likes him. In gym class, Akari talks with her friends, as Jiro stares at Shirori. He watches as both Shirori and Akari stare at Minami playing basketball, which makes him feel down. Saki tells Akari a rumor about how Minami isn't going to swap partners. Sadaharu is told the same rumor to Jiro, which makes him further depressed. He then pictures Minami as the hero of a video game who gets both Akari and Shirori, while he sees himself as a background character. After class, Akari puts the gym equipment back in its place, but is surprised by Minami, who is also helping with the equipment. Shocked, she ends up clumsily clashing against a shelf, which makes a box fall off of it. Minami rushes, and moves her away before it falls on her head. As she notices her heart still races from Minami, she becomes relieved, and wonders why would she even need to feel relief at that. She then asks Minami if he'll stay with Shirori forever, and he responds that if Shirori is alright with that, he might as things are going well. This makes her cry, but says that she only got dust in her eye. Minami then approaches her, and tells her to look at him in the eyes. As that happens, Sadaharu tries to find Jiro in the utilities room, but end up seeing Minami and Akari, who are from his point of view, apparently kissing each other. On his way out, Shirori approaches Jiro, who asks him why he's feeling down. He then asks her if she'll stay by Minami's side forever. She answers that she doesn't know, and that she can't decide alone if she'll switch partners. As she tells him that if he made it up to A rank, she stops herself and tries to leave, but Jiro stops her, ensuring her that he'll make it to A rank. But just as he's just about to ask her something, Sadaharu abruptly comes out of nowhere, and interrupts him. He tries to tell him what he saw in the gym, but Akari and Minami show up. Shirori and Minami then leave together, and then, a seemingly sad Akari tells Jiro to head back to class. Later, Jiro overhears Akari's friends say that Akari left early. Sadaharu then tells him that he saw Minami and Akari kissing, but Jiro tells him that he doesn't care, though he ends up feeling down over it. Back home, he finds Akari on the couch. After he's initially ignored by her, he sits down next to her, and says that he's sorry for not being Minami. She asks him why he's bringing him up, and then reveals that he heard that they kissed. Depressed, he says that he'll cheer for them, but she then starts laughing, saying that all he was doing back then was check for dust in her eyes. Akari explains to him how Minami won't look her way even after trying hard, and begins to cry. Jiro then suddenly grabs her by her shoulders, but she doesn't want him to look at her like this. He hugs her, saying that he can't see her now, which prompts her to cry harder as she hugs him back. Now at night, he claims to himself that he panicked at that moment. Akari then leaves the shower, and sits right next to him on the couch. She then reveals to him that her kiss with him was her first time kissing someone, but he ends up blanking out after that reveal. As Jiro is about to leave to class, Akari helps him with his tie, but she notices him staring down at her boobs, making her choke him. She then rests her head on his chest, and tells him to take care. As this raises the point tally to 14, she stops doing it and leaves. At the school, Jiro has class duties with one of her classmates, Mei, and finds Shirori in the classroom instead as she took over for her. Later on she has lunch with Mei, and asks her why she doesn't confess to Jiro, but she tells her that he doesn't think of her that way. She advises her to kiss him, but then says that she's just joking. Meanwhile, Akari is having lunch with her friends. They tease her with Jiro, jokingly saying that they'll support their relationship. Akari blushes at this, but reassures them that the man for her is still Minami. Back in the classroom at noon, Jiro and Shirori almost finished with their duties. Akari, back in the school, walks down a corridor, wondering why Jiro hasn't read her messages, but ends up seeing him with Shirori in classroom. She stares at them for a moment, but ends up leaving. As Jiro and Shiori's erasers clash for a moment, she asks him to close his eyes and lean down. It seems like they're going to kiss, only for her to tell him that he had dust on him. Shirori then thinks to herself that she wasn't able to go through with it, apologizing to Mei. Back in his dorm, Akari approaches a melancholic Jiro on their balcony. After talking for a bit, she asks him to call her by her first name, as he only has called her by her last name Watanabe so far. She then tells him that if she ever lost confidence and he happened to be by her side, it'd be comforting if he did so. He then mutters aka Ri, to her surprise. He apologizes and says to forget it happened, but she instead tells him to say it again. But she suddenly gets mad and tells him that it's irritating for her to use his first name while he only uses her last name, as if she was the only one in love. She blushes at this, and tries to explain that it was just hypothetical for the practical, and rushes back into her room. Jiro tells himself that there's no way she feels that way since she has Ninami, while she tells herself that she's so confused. Now at class, the students are told they'll have to do special tests. At noon after class, Akari tells Jiro she's going to karaoke, but after finding out she doesn't have any clue on what to do regarding the test, he forces her to go home with him to study. Later, Akari demands a break after only having done a handful of problems. She then sits right next to Jiro, and tells him she'll do anything he wants. But he fiercely replies that they're going to study, with her then saying that her plan to stop studying failed. He then notices that Akari actually solved the problem, and encourages her to keep on going. After some time, she finally finishes, and teases Jiro again by calling him sensei. She asks of calling him that made his heart race, but he doesn't reply, so she then sits on him and asks again. She turns around and faces him, and tells him that he can look all he wants. He tries insanely hard not to look, but Akari only gets mad at that. Jiro's hand then slips, which in turn makes him slip, and end up on top of Akari. As the sound of his heart resonates loudly, she claims that he lost. But she notices that something's wrong as his face is serious, and tells him to get off. Ignoring her, he touches her cheek. She then accepts him, and as he's about to kiss her, she quickly stops him as he's begun bleeding from his nose. After that, she thanks the nosebleed for the save. Akari then explains to him that she just wanted him to take a breath, since he looks so impatient and panicked due to Shirori all the time, but he responds that he's also working hard for her, so that she can pair up with Minami as soon as possible. Though, Akari then thinks to herself that if they do end up changing partners, she won't live with Jiro anymore, but she tries to convince herself that it's the right decision. In the morning, Jiro notices that Akari is calling him by his last name, which she never does. Despite this, she seems to act normal, as she tells him she got some chocolates from Saki. She wants to eat with him later. At school, he and Sadaharu noticed a girl confess to Mei that she's in love with her, but she ends up turning her down. Later, Jiro remembers that Akari asked him to call her by her first name the other day, but isn't sure if that's the reason why she's behaving like this. Suddenly, Akari barges into the bathroom, and shows him that they ended up 8th in the ranking list. Now on their couch, she calls her Akari again. This makes her blush, and leads to her calling him by his first name again. He repeats her name for a few times, making her blush more, and then she asks him to call her by her first name from now on. Later at school, Mei notices that Jiro and Akari have been ranked 8th, and warns Shirori that she's at risk of losing Jiro. But then, a runaway ball hits her head, making her collapse. Now at the nurse's office, Mei has called Jiro up, and instructs him to check on Shirori. He finds her, and after talking for a while, she mentions how she still gets nervous with boys. Jiro that asks her if she's ever kissed Minami, but she denies it. She explains that if she kissed someone she loves, he would end up hating her due to her being terrible at it. But then she asks Jiro if she could practice with him. Jiro musters up the courage and goes for it, but she stops him. Just as that happens, Saki enters the nurse's office trying to find a place to nap, but ends up seeing two people on top of each other, not identifying who they are, which makes her apologize and leave. Jiro, on top of Shirori, have ended up kissing each other. Astounded, they both acknowledge it was an accident as they panicked. Jiro then leaves. Later, Saki meets up with Akari, who keeps texting Jiro as he doesn't answer. She tells her that she saw a guy and a girl on a bed at the nurse's office, implying that they were having sexual relations. She then finally receives a text from Jiro, who tells her that he was with Shirori at the nurse's office. At night, she ends up arriving late at home feeling depressed. She finds Jiro sleeping on the couch, who's deep asleep because he eats some of her chocolates, since apparently they had whiskey in them. Unbeknownst to her though, Akari didn't even know until now. She then notices that he was actually waiting for her, so she takes off her clothes, and lays down right next to him. On noticing he can't hear anything, she begs him to wait on love while she's still his wife. In the morning, they both wake up, and a surprised Jiro asks her why she's only wearing her underwear, but she lies to him, telling him that they had slept together last night. He freaks out and asks her if he's not a virgin anymore. With the implication, she realizes that Jiro didn't actually do it with Shirori yesterday. She then tells him that she was actually lying. After some bickering, she blocks his ears so he can't hear her, and disappointedly tells him that she'd never do it with him knowing that he has Shirori. Shaori gets help from Saki and Matsumi in moving some bags, but they then drag Jiro and Sadaharu into helping them as well. But Shirori tries to avoid Jiro as she's still nervous because of what happened the other day. Later at park, Akari gets asked by Saki what she thinks about Jiro. She blushes and stutters, making her friends realize that she actually feels something for him. They cheer her up, and then later go their own way. Discussing what to do to help her make a decision, they decide to invite her to a festival. Later, Jiro helps Akari put on a yukata as Minami is also going to the festival, and she wants to look good for him. Almost done, she asks him to tuck in the edges, and he reluctantly does so, but this makes them both blush. Now at the festival, Akari meets up with her friends who are waiting for Minami and his friends. They arrive, but without Minami, and they explain that he was called up by his workplace at the last minute. Akari then wanders alone through the festival, wondering why she feels relieved that Minami didn't show up. Though after thinking for a bit, she decides not to give up on him, and tries to leave to his workplace. But right at that moment, she ends up seeing Minami walking alongside Shirori at another part of the festival. Though what Minami was actually doing was just accompanying her back from the supermarket. He then departs to his workplace, while she leaves back to their dorm. At home, Jiro gets jealous thinking about Akari being with Minami, but then tries to convince himself that he doesn't care. He then receives a call from Akari, who he hears crying. He quickly heads out to find her, but as he opens the door, he finds her sitting outside. She then hugs him, and cries her heart out. A bit later, they're now watching the fireworks from their balcony. Akari, after teasing him for a bit, asks him if he's jealous, but he replies that he doesn't know. Surprised at this, she asks him to tie her ribbon any way he likes now. As she tries to show him how to finish it on her phone, it slips, but he grabs it, ending up with his arms around her. She holds his hands, and asks him to call her by her first name. He does so, and as she embraces him, they see heart-shaped fireworks explode in the sky. As that happens, he thinks to himself that he'll support her with Minami, but also wonders why he felt relieved when he saw that Akari was back home. Akari and Jiro find out they finished 13th in the rankings. Later, Jiro takes a bath, thinking on Akari still seems determined to switch partners after all this. She then barges in, and desperately asks him for help, because she saw a spider. After not being able to find it, she forces Jiro to stay with her at all times out of fear of it showing up again. Later in the living room, she asks Jiro to spoon-feed her some of his ice cream. After talking about how a pair of students began dating due to the practical, she asks him if they should date as well, but then says it was a joke. As they both ponder on what she just said, she notices the spider, and freaks out. After killing it, they both go sleep in their bedrooms. Akari falls asleep, touching her wall, as if reaching for Jiro. In Shiori's dorm, she talks to Minami about how her friend who reunited with the boy she liked, kissed him, telling him that she can't face him anymore, but that it made her realize that she really loves him. He tells her that her friend should try for it before it's too late, so she doesn't have any regrets. The next day at noon, Mei and Shirori are interrupted by Mei's husband, Terafune, who tells them that he'll go out all night with Minami. He suggests that since both Shirori and Mei will be alone, they should have a sleepover. Mei blushes, and gets mad at him, but Shirori happily accepts the idea. At a coffee shop, Shirori and Mei plan up their sleepover, but every proposition Shirori has makes Mei embarrassed, to the point where she chokes on her drink after she suggests that they bathe together. But she then receives a text from her mom, telling her to go to her parents' house, and ends up having to postpone the sleepover. Around the same time, Jiro and Sadaharu are having dinner at a restaurant. He gets mad at Jiro because he ended up 13th in the ranking, so he has to kiss him to cancel his luck. As that happens, Shirori walks back home on her own, and ends up outside the restaurant Jiro is in. He looks out the window, and notices her staring, but she then simply leaves. He then headbutts Sadaharu, and rushes out to find her outside. He catches up to her, and explains that it was a misunderstanding, but he doesn't realize that she actually didn't notice him, but rather, she just read wrong the name of a dish outside, which made her stare at it for a bit. This makes her think that he's talking about the kiss from the other day, but she gets confused when he mentions Sadaharu. They both realize they got confused, and apologize to each other. He then helps her carry her bag home. She mentions the time when they were at the nurse's office, and thanks Jiro for helping her learn what a kiss was. She then approaches him for a kiss, but as she hears some cats in the background, stops, and instead asks him if they shall head home. Summer vacation has arrived, and Sadaharu tells Jiro that he'll be working at the live and cafe next to the beach. His brother is working in for 3 days to get some money. He also tells Jiro that he enrolled him in as well since he doesn't want to be alone with extroverts. Shori then runs into them, and tells them that she and Mei also applied for the same job. Back home, Jiro is surprised by Akari, who shows him one of the swimsuits she bought, since she's planning on going to the beach with her friends to a part-time job as well. He tells her that Shirori will be working with him, and explains that he's got to start making some moves with her, since she's also trying hard to make things work with Minami. She then gets on top of him, and demands him to tell her that he'll miss her. And after cuddling up for a bit, the point tally goes up to 22, which makes her stop as she apparently only wanted to rack up some points. She then asks him if he likes the bikini, and after he says that it's normal for him to like it since he's a man, she decides that she'll use the other bikini on the beach, telling him that she will save this one just for him. Then, after comparing their flyers, they end up realizing they actually will be working at the same job. Jiro, Sadaharu, Shirori, Mayakari, Saki, Natsumi, and Manami arrive at a part-time job on a boat, and are then shown their lodging house, with Terafune already there, where they will live separated by gender. Later, they're instructed to choose between working in the kitchen, or on the floor. After Shirori asks Jiro which one will he choose, he tells her that he'll work at the kitchen, so she chooses that as well. Meanwhile, Akari gets help from Minami. Back in the kitchen, Mei calls Jiro over, so he can help them reach something on top of the shelf, in attempt to bring him and Shirori closer. Succeeding at this, she leaves and drags Sadaharu along with her just before he interrupts them. Shirori is then teaching Jiro how to put cream on a drink, but she then inadvertently presses her jugs against his arm, making him squeeze the piping bag out of shock. Whipping cream ends up spilling all over Shirori, so Jiro, embarrassed, helps her wipe it off. She then holds his hands, and asks him to really look at her. As they're about to kiss, she notices Natsumi and Saki spying on them, which makes her scream. Now with both of them embarrassed, they both wonder if they blew it, and apologize for each other. But at the same time, they both think to themselves that they have to keep trying, as the summer has just begun. At the beach, the girls are now wearing their swimsuits, but Jiro notices that Akari is wearing a different one to the one she showed her. Then Sahara claims that she usually shows more skin, which makes Jiro think back to how she promised him that the other swimsuit would be only for him. Mei and Shirori then approach them, and she asks them if they want to go to the place she's pointing at, which appears to be a hotel. As Shirori appears to be pointing at a hotel, it turns out she was actually signaling at the part of the beach in front of it. They make a sand castle, and Shirori tells Jiro to make a tunnel through the castle with her. He does, and their hands end up meeting in the middle. Akari notices that they're being too playful, and ends up annoyed at it. Later, they're forced to go buy ice cream together, as they were selected via rock paper scissors. Now waiting for their order to be ready, Jiro heads back to pick it up, but Akari is then approached by two guys who begin to hit on her. Jiro, now back, notices this, and gets nervous, but after initially not knowing what to do, she grabs her by her hand, and says that she's his wife, which makes the guys apologize and run off. Jiro immediately apologizes as he felt Akari hated being called his wife, but she gets mad at him since he was being cool, but ruined it. They then finally head back. Now at noon, the girls are enjoying themselves in a communal bath. After Akari leaves it, she encounters Jiro outside, and notices that he has burnt himself, so she applies cream on his back. Noticing that his neck is not ticklish, she begins to tickle his stomach, and then rests her head on his back, telling him that they haven't done this today. As he puts her hand on top of his, Saki leaves the communal bath, and finds them both outside, not knowing what just happened. Jiro calls her Watanabe again since they're not alone, but this makes her furious, and through texts, orders him to go to the beach shop with her in 10 minutes. Back at the lounge, the girls wonder where Akari is, while the boys do the same but with Jiro. Mei then decides to go on a walk with Shirori. At the beach shop, Jiro apologizes, but she gets mad at him for constantly apologizing. She then takes off her jacket, and reveals that she's wearing the swimsuit she showed him back home. She tells him that he hates how he acts cold towards her when they're not alone, but he explains that he thinks it must be embarrassing for her to be seen with him. She then tells him to look at her like how he does when they're at home, and forcefully shakes her boobs front of his face. He calms her down, and she explains that she fears not being a married couple anymore, with the implication that she's jealous. Mei and Shirori then approach the beach shop, making Jiro and Akari hide in a changing stall. As the girls talk outside, Jiro tells Akari to not make any noise so they hear them. But she thinks to herself that even in this moment in Jiro's heart, she doesn't even exist. She recalls how when she was chasing after Minami, she was able to be optimistic, but with Jiro, she gets scared that he will leave. Feeling all muddled due to knowing that Jiro really cares about Shirori, she mutters that she hates this. Jiro asks her to hang on a little longer, to which she responds, "So you will be able to leave." Mei then claims to have heard something, but Shirori tells her to stop as she gets scared of that stuff. Jiro begins to sweat, and those sweat drops fall on Akari's boobs. She pushes him because of this, making the girls outside hear more noises, which makes Shirori run away in fear, holding Mei with her. Akari, now relieved, asks Jiro to get off of her, but he tells her in a serious tone that she wanted him to look, getting mad over her for apparently toying with him earlier, he hits closer to her. She tells him to move his knee as it is poking her, but he says that that isn't his knee. He falls on top of her, but she tells him that they can't do this. Jiro then falls on the ground, breathing heavily. Later, after getting help, they're now outside the communal baths, saying that it was just a mild heatstroke that caused him to behave like that. Jiro apologizes, but she reminds him that she told him not to apologize. She explains to him that she wants to know him better since they've been married for 4 months, and she still doesn't know anything about him yet. In the morning, Shirori lays awake on her bed as she didn't get much sleep, remembering that she saw Akari come back to the lounge last night, followed by Jiro not soon after. Later, Jiro goes to the bathroom and finds Akari in there. She teases him with what happened the night prior, but then tells him that that's a secret between wife and husband. Later at the cafe, Jiro and Shirori talk about tonight's recreational activity. He tells her that it's apparently a test of courage, and she freaks out as she claims she'll never make it through that. She then tells him that there must be something at the beach, as she heard voices last night there, but she tells him she must have imagined it. He tells her that it'd be nice if they were paired together, as he already knows she gets scared easily. She tells him that she loves that kind side of him, but Jiro gets dumbfounded by that. She apologizes for just blurting that out. Sadaharu then appears, and gets mad at him due to how lucky he is, but offers him the chance to have him pair up with Shirori anyways, explaining that the pairs are chosen by lottery, and his big brother has access to it. At the lounge, the girls pull the raffle drawings. Mei tells Shirori that everything will be fine, and then heads out. She meets up with Sadaharu, handing him the list of the girls' respective drawings. She asks him if this all just for Jiro and Shirori, and he asserts so. But this was a lie as he promised Jiro he'd also pair Akari up with Minami. Later that night, the couples are drawn, and they head their different ways into the forest. Akari gets afraid, and holds Minami's hand out of shock, but she can't help it but compare it with Jiro's, though she tries not to think of him. She then notices that she doesn't have her phone on her anymore. Jiro and Shirori make it to the finish line, but he tells Sadaharu that Shirori was too scared for him to do anything. They all begin to worry about Akari and Manami as they're taking too long. Jiro gets irritated at the fact that she's with Manami, but tries to tell himself that it doesn't matter. Hadichiro then receives a call from Manami, who tells him that he got separated from Akari, so he's heading back. The students head back to their rooms as they're told there's no danger. Shirori holds Jiro's hand, and tells him to head back with her, but he instead runs off to find Akari. As he tries to find her, Akari sees someone approach her. She shouts Jiro's name, thinking it's him, but finds out it's actually Minami. Meanwhile, Jiro finds Akari's phone on the ground. Now on a bench, Minami apologizes for not being Jiro, and realizes that Akari likes Jiro. Meanwhile, Shori finds Jiro, and tells him that Minami has found Akari. After talking about how he's changed since he began living with Akari, he asks her if something happened between her and Minami after they kissed in the nurse's room, but she profoundly denies so, saying that she hasn't done anything like that since then. She reveals that that was her first kiss, and then asks him if it was different for him. She apologizes and tries to leave, but he stops her, that she'll get soaked. She then rests her head on his chest, and asks him if she'll show her a side of him that Akari doesn't know. Back with Akari, she asks him if things would change if she became his wife and the marriage practical, but he apologizes, revealing to her that he noticed how she feels a long time ago, and explains to her that he's in love with someone else, an unrequited love. He encourages her to start things with Jiro, and she agrees, stating that she'll try her hardest so she won't have any regrets. But meanwhile, Jiro and Shirori are kissing each other under the rain. Akari throws a bill at the wishing shrine, this time thinking on Jiro. Meanwhile, Shirori can't stop thinking about the time she kissed Jiro. In his dorm, Jiro does the same, but thinks about how she began apologizing over and over afterwards, and that she only said, "Let's head back after that." Confused at this, he chooses to go to the store. As he tries to pick up a manga, someone else tries to do so as well, only to see that it's Shirori. Surprised at seeing each other, she tells him that she's buying the manga for her little brother. After having a nice chat, he's relieved that things aren't awkward with her after what happened. Now outside, she invites him over to her place. Now there, Jiro is happy due to being able to be with her. Things are awkward though, as they both don't know if they're bored or if the other hates them. Suddenly, Shirori asks him to look outside, as a double rainbow is formed in front of her dorm. She takes a selfie with Jiro, and as he then thinks this is the time to take a step, he tries to tell her something, but she interrupts him, showing him a photo of when they all were at the beach. He ends up staring at Akari, and then tells Shirori that he forgot what he was going to say. Back at his place, he wonders why he decided not to say anything, but then receives multiple texts from Akari, telling him to meet her in front of the station in 2 hours, and then it's a date. Jiro freaks out, but after initially thinking that she's messing with him, he ends up heading there. At the station, Akari is 15 minutes late, so Jiro decides to leave, but right at that moment, Akari finally appears, and apologizes while panting, saying that it took her longer than she thought to get ready, and that she forgot her phone. She then holds his hand, and begins their date. She takes him to a beach cafe, a cat cafe, to buy clothes, and even wins a stuffed pig for her in a crane game. As they both are about to head back to their homes, finishing their date, she remembers she wanted to buy a charm at the shrine, and runs off there, with Jiro chasing after her. They end up running into Shirori, who tells them that she was also going to the shrine. She then proposes Akari to race her there, and she accepts. They begin the race, and as they run, they notice a boy and a girl playing together, a couple about to kiss each other, a husband and wife leaving their wedding, a couple with their baby, and one with their toddler. They finally reach the top of the stairs where the shrine is, but then an old lady asks them if they're chaste. After telling her that they were racing each other, she tells her husband Jiro that they gave them a fright. The girls get surprised at hearing this name, and watch as the couple leave. Finally, a tired Jiro reaches them, and then they all pray. Jiro thinks on how this place is famous for fulfilling romantic wishes. He begins making his own by praying. But that's where season 1 of the series ends. Let me know your thoughts on this anime. Also let me know in the comments who you want Jiro to end up with. And if you enjoyed watching this video, consider liking and subscribing for more like it. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.